I was studying for exams when Claude texted, "We're breaking into the school tonight." Claude doesn't joke with verbs like breaking. I texted back no while putting on my shoes. Midnight in 50 minutes. The jacaranda tapped the window like a metronome. My highlighter dried on a page about osmosis that, frankly, could drown without me. Another buzz. "Claude, you know how to keep secrets, right?" I left a note, walking to clear my head, and slid out. The street smelled like cut metal and sprinklers. At the courts, Claude leaned into the chain link, a ring of keys winking in his fist. "Tell me this is about stealing the chem answer key," I said. "Better," he said. "Proof." "Of what?" "That they're lying about the lab." The keys chimed once, too loud, and every moth in the sodium light looked briefly like a witness. I pulled up my hood. "Okay," I said. "Show me." We started walking, trying to make our footsteps sound like they belonged to someone with permission. The neighborhood was emptied of everything but sprinklers and porch lights pretending not to notice us. Claude kept the keys in his pocket now. The metal still clicked like a nervous habit. "What makes you think they're lying?" I asked. "An adult told a neat story," he said. "Neat stories are rarely true. Also, maintenance gossip. Harrow moved boxes the day after the fire." "What kind of boxes?" "The kind that hold problems." We cut across the field behind the gym where the grass lay cropped in a crew cut and the scoreboard blinked its unhelpful midnight. Our school hunched out of the dark like it had something to hide. Maybe it did. Maybe we did. "You're sure about this?" I asked, mostly to hear someone be sure. "No," he said. "But I'm certain we'll regret not knowing." That line landed somewhere just below my ribs and stayed. We slid along the art wing, where murals slept under plexiglass like fish under ice. We kept to the shadow of the auditorium wall, following the seam where brick met the new pale concrete of the addition, as if walking a timeline with our shoulders. At the corner we paused, listening. The building hummed, refrigerators, distant vents, the kind of mechanical breathing you don't notice by day. No footsteps, no voices, just the small electricity of what we were about to do. Claude took the key ring out like a magician palming a coin and sorted silently by touch. Brass kissed brass. He nodded once, the universal sign for ready or not. He slid the key into the side door by the theater, turned to listen, and opened it with the surety of a person born to the hinge. Inside smelled like varnish and dust and forgotten applause. The hallway swallowed our footsteps and gave back a hush. We passed the costume room with its cracked label, "Clothes, don't touch," and the ghost of a papier-mâché dragon peeking from behind a curtain like it had been banished for chewing scenery. Claude led, I followed, and our twin beams of light stayed low, respectful, so they wouldn't catch too much shine. We slipped through a heavy fire door and into the old auditorium. Even in near dark, the room felt ceremonial. Aisles like aisles in a church, seats like humble pews with gum calcified under them, a stage wearing a curtain the color of a bruise. Claude's hand hovered over the beam of his flashlight. "Left side," he whispered. "There's a service stair to the basement." On cue, the building exhaled, the way the gym does before a big game. We froze, waited, unfroze. At the left aisle we followed the wall, fingertips grazing paint bumps and staples. At the exit sign, Claude shouldered the push bar gently and it gave like it knew him. The air beyond felt colder, close to concrete. The stairwell rang slightly under our weight. We walked like we were balancing porcelain. At the bottom, we entered a corridor low-ceilinged and damp, where pipes wore thick sweaters and valves glinted like winks. The fluorescent bulbs down here didn't light so much as declare their existence, buzzing at a frequency you hear with your teeth. The room we wanted wore a label in flaking letters: Storage, Archive. Claude ran his keys like rosary beads between his fingers, testing shapes to slots. On the fifth try, an old lock turned, reluctant as a man woken from a nap. The room breathed cold. File cabinets lined one wall, gunmetal gray, and opposite them a cardboard city teetered, boxes of programs, yearbooks, maintenance logs, eras of us. Dust hazed the beam of our lights into cones. I put my sleeve over my mouth without thinking. "Admin's old paper brain," Claude murmured. "If there's something they don't want to parse in an email search, it'll be in a drawer here." The cabinet he pulled open squealed a metal scream into that quiet. We both winced. His flashlight slid into the cavity and landed on folders, manila, labeled with careful block letters. Contracts, incidents, facilities, staff, active, 2005-06, staff, inactive. My heart tried to climb up and look over my collar. "What are we looking for?" I said. "Anomalies," he said. "Anything misfiled or stashed. People hide things like people hide feelings. Not well." He flipped expertly. I started at the next drawer, careful to slide each file exactly back so the finger dust on the tabs wouldn't look rearranged. Most of it was the paperwork of normal life, budgets like forests of numbers, insurance letters in careful legal fonts, permission slips whose parent signatures all looked suspiciously similar. It was astonishing how much boringness could pile up and still not fix a single dangerous thing. Mid-drawer, my fingers paused. A folder thinner than the others, label faded into tan. 2 words in a different hand than most, slanted, urgent, Hazel North. "Claude," I said, my voice low and twice my own pulse. He looked up. I handed him the folder. He opened it the way people open small boxes that might contain very old jewelry. Inside, photocopies of emails, their headers cropped like someone had printed them in a hurry without the grace to keep the dates right in frame, but legible if you leaned. The first was addressed to Dr. Harrow, our principal, back then new enough to have been a promise. "Your decision to suspend me is retaliation for my refusal to falsify the..." The line broke at the photocopy's edge. Claude glanced up, my gaze pinned to the next page, letterhead cracked with the logo of the State Board of Education, Office of Professional Practices. A complaint filed, language bristly with alleged, and pending, and investigate. It referenced a proof-of-concept test run after hours in the lab boiler room, without proper authorization, to evaluate a supplier upgrade. A name was blacked out under concerned parent. A date, 12 years ago in November. Those words did the kind of alchemy in my stomach I'd only read about, solid to liquid with no telltale intermediate. Another page, meeting minutes. A terse note about administrative leave, North, H. Another, a blurry scan of a purchasing order stamped De Bruin Industrial. De Bruin, Claude whispered, his mind already running. Faulty pressure valves. 3 recalls between '02 and '06. You just know that. He had the decency to look sheepish. Disasters have paper trails. I read them. At the back of the folder, a real photograph slid free, slick under his thumb. Grainy, flash bright, the old boiler room, the hulking tank tagged with the De Bruin logo, copper lines like veins running out of it into brick. Red digital dated in the corner like any photograph from 2003. On the back, in that same slanted hand. Uninstalled 2006. New system 2010. Lab water lines still tie in here. Don't let them pretend they forgot. Hazel was trying to stop a corner from being cut, I said. She was trying to stop time from finding the cut corner, he replied. We read the last clipping, a local article no one would have seen if they hadn't been looking for it. Local teacher resigns, cites irreconcilable differences. Photo, a woman maybe late 30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes trained somewhere past the camera. If I'd passed her on the sidewalk, I would have stepped aside so she could keep going toward wherever she was trying to go. We need dates, names, I whispered. We need the complaint file number. We need to not die of being caught, Claude said, and right on cue, the line of light under the door brightened like a mouth breathing in. A shadow interrupted it. The shadow paused. We both froze. Claude's hand found mine, no theater to it, just contact, the kind you make when the world shrinks to whatever fits inside your 2 sets of bones. The handle lowered. Keys flirted with a lock. A click, tiny, a hiccuped heartbeat. The door eased open an inch. The beam slid inside at ankle level, scanning the damp line on the floor, the dull toes of our shoes, the boxes rising like small towers. I remembered in a bright, absurd way that I was wearing socks with lemons on them. The beam lifted. The beam missed us. The beam withdrew. Footsteps receded with the slow, unalarmed cadence of someone who had not found what they were looking for. Another light clicked on farther down the corridor, a dry buzz. We counted in the language of our blood until the hum was just the building again. Claude let go of my hand the way you unwrap tape. Careful, reluctant. He slid Hazel's folder closed, tucked it back where the dust would hide our fingerprints of curiosity. He took photos of the telling pages with his phone. No flash, just that tiny shick. Go, he mouthed. In the hallway, the extra fluorescent kept the air a harsher white. We walked it like it belonged to us, like we were leaving band practice, like we'd never touched the past. We turned into the stairwell and were 3 steps up when a voice below us said, not loudly, stop. It wasn't a bark. It was a decision in a single syllable. We turned. Principal Harrow stood at the base of the stairs, tie loosened, expression flat with fatigue and something else, suspicion's older cousin, perhaps. Back down, he said. Slowly. We obeyed, because that's what you do with gravity and authority. Up close, Harrow's face looked exactly like the one he wore at assemblies when he reminded us that integrity was our school spine. It also looked like a person who had slept on couches in the administrative office for 2 nights after the fire. His eyes went from Claude to me, taking inventory the way you do in a storeroom you're afraid is missing something important. Names, he said. We gave them. Ritual. Do your parents know? No, I said, before he could braid the rope long enough to tie around my guilt. Do you understand this is trespassing? That it's a crime? Is hiding records in a basement a crime? Claude asked before I could elbow him. Is writing electrical fault when you know the truth is inconvenient a crime? Harrow's gaze sharpened like a knife on a whetstone. What do you think you know? We know Hazel North existed, I said. Saying it out loud felt like opening a window. We know she filed a complaint about a boiler upgrade to a supplier with recalls. We know she was put on leave, then resigned. We know someone moved those files into a cabinet labeled like a grave. We know the lab's water lines tie into the old system more than anyone wanted to remember. And we know your signature is on several purchasing orders. The principal breathed in through his nose, out slow. He didn't deny the name. He didn't even look surprised. He only looked as if he were deciding which part of himself to put on. Hazel was brilliant, he said finally. And infuriating. She believed I loved compliance more than children. There were years she wasn't wrong. He looked briefly older, like the fluorescent had added 10 years instead of light. She didn't want the De Bruin contract. I signed it anyway after the board told me to find savings or cut a staff member. We replaced the system 4 years later with the one we have now. The fire, he pointed past the stairwell, toward the sealed wing, was electrical. The pipes complicated it. They didn't start it. Your report says electrical, Claude said. So does your investigators. We'd like to see the city fire marshals. Something changed in Harrow's jaw, humorless surprise, maybe, that we knew where the levers were. He gestured upward. Come, he said. It was theater, sure, but also something like contrition walked in a suit. He led us not to his office where the good diplomas live, but down the blue-taped hall toward the science wing. The caution bands slouched like tired parade ribbons. He slashed them once with a key knife and ushered us into the charred lab. The room felt like an idea had burned, chairs contorted mid-gesture, ceiling tiles like fossil leaves on the floor, plastic scarred into melted topography. The air had the cooked socket tang of electrical burn, undercut with wet ash. Harrow crossed to the far bench, knelt by a scorched outlet panel. He shone his light and traced with a pen. See this arc signature, he said, in the tone he used when he explained school policy and you wanted to refuse the vocabulary. The origin is behind the outlet. Heat climbed, melted insulation, shorted. The sprinklers activated late, older heads, slower reaction. Water from the lab line sprayed onto superheated surfaces and made steam, amplifying damage, yes, but not causing ignition. He stood, walked to a locked wall cabinet, opened it with a key. A binder emerged, the color of bureaucracy, off-white, plastic sleeve captioned incident, lab wing. He flipped to a thin report stamped with the city seal. He handed it to me. The words crawled dense and neat and dry. Probable cause, electrical fault behind bench outlet. Contributing factors, aged sprinkler heads, proximity of polymer materials, water line integrity compromised by heat. No hedge toward a pipe being the match. Claude read it twice with his mouth closed like he was holding a stone there. The disappointment wasn't for being wrong. It was for wanting to be right about the kind of thing that would have let anger be simple. So you weren't lying about that, he said. Not about that. Harrow looked at the blackened bench like it had been a student who had given him trouble and then graduated. But about Hazel? I buried her complaint deeper than necessary because I was ashamed I hadn't fought harder. I told myself, she was dramatic, she would have caused a scandal that would have closed our doors and cut a dozen jobs. That was partially true and mostly cowardice. I stored the box down there after the fire because I thought, someone will make a story with one villain and it will be me. And I panicked. I am not a cartoon. I am a person who made a calculation I hate. That is not an excuse. It is what you find when you dig. The three of us stood in the burnt classroom like an afterimage of school. I could feel my opinion of him tilting, not toward absolution, but toward the strange terrain where truth lives with its shoes muddy. We're going to talk about Hazel, I said. At the board meeting. Public comment is Wednesday, he said. I'll put her on the agenda. We'll propose something in her name. I will put the complaint file into the public record so it isn't just a rumor that teenagers whisper in stairwells. And I'll read the marshal's report into the minutes so no one can say I doctored it. What about this? I asked, meaning our presence, meaning the open door and the cut tape and the damp in my socks. I'm going to tell myself I found 2 students verifying the location of an ancient library book, he said. Please return it in good condition. He walked us out. We passed the trophy case glittering with other people's wins. The floors, freshly waxed 2 days ago, smelled virtuous. At the side door, he paused. You two were reckless, he said. Reckless is close to brave. The line is usually whether you're only protecting yourselves. Tonight you weren't. I thought you'd yell, I said, then felt 12 for saying it. He laughed once, tired. I reserve that for vaping in bathrooms and leaving trash in bleachers. Outside, the air clasped us cool. The night felt indifferent, which was a relief. Claude let the door click home with a careful hand like closing a sleeping child's bedroom. Did that happen? He asked. I think so, I said. Unless we died of dust down there, and this is the benevolent afterlife where principles are complicated. We took the long way back to the courts. Every sprinkler in the neighborhood seemed to turn off at once, silence falling like a curtain. I wanted to lay down on the center circle, stare up, and let the moths script something on the black. Instead, we stood at the fence, our hands on the cool diamond pattern. Harrow's going to follow through, I said. It came out half hope, half warning to the world not to disappoint me. He will, Claude said. He saw our leverage. Also, he's a person who wants to be a person who does the right thing. Translation, I said. He's not a villain, just an adult. That is its own hazard class, Claude said. But yes. We split at the corner, our goodbye a small motion like a bird changing perches. At home my note waited where I'd left it, patient. I crumpled it, uncrumpled it, and tucked it into the back of my chemistry book like a pressed leaf for some future self to find and remember that once I had misbehaved on purpose. I slept in small pieces, stitched with dreams where doors opened onto rooms full of water, and Hazel stood in the doorway and held a match. Morning made everything small again on purpose. Toast, socks, attendance, bells obeyed. Ms. Alvarez said, "Good morning, chemists," and I felt for the first time that maybe the word fit like a jacket I was growing into. Claude sat 2 rows back and sketched a robot out of a dismantled pen. When he looked up, his glance said, "We know, and now we have to act like we don't for a few hours." That's high school, I guess. At lunch we wrote the speech. We borrowed a library study room that smelled like plastic binders and dried lavender and ran lines aloud into the carpet. We cut adjectives like overgrown hair. We kept 3 sentences that mattered. A teacher named Hazel North warned us, and we punished her for it. Accountability is not the same as punishment. We want a scholarship in her name for a student who refuses the cheap answer. We found Ms. Alvarez after school and told her the edited version, the one without keys and doors. She listened with her head tilted the way you tilt when you're listening for an off-frequency beep only you can hear. At Hazel's name, she pressed a fist under her nose the way people do when they're keeping the water in their eyes until they're ready to swim. I remember her, she said. She believed the lab should be the safest room in the building because that's where we teach kids how to flirt with danger responsibly. I had a son sick that year. I was less brave than I think I should have been about backing her. I'll sponsor your comment Wednesday. Thank you, I said. Gratitude felt too small a coin for that transaction. And don't ever tell me if you broke into anything, she added, which in Ms. Alvarez was the same as promising to hold a thing you could not say. Wednesday unfolded like a long, breath-holding exercise. I passed the chemistry exam feeling half untethered and half anchored by the boredom of balancing equations. The satisfaction of an answer appearing where there wasn't one 5 seconds before felt like why anyone loves science, or stories, or both. Humans like to make patterns and call it understanding. When evening came, the boardroom was too bright and too cold, as if illuminated by the same bulbs from the basement. Adults wore their good faces. Name plates glittered. Harrow's tie was properly knotted. Claude had made little copies of Hazel's photocopied article and a single-page explainer with dates, file numbers, and why a scholarship wasn't just a gesture, it was a signal about our values. When public comment opened, a man with an earnest beard stood and complained about parking lot speed bumps. A woman asked for gluten-free options at the concession stand. Then Harrow called our names. My palms forgot their job. I stood. The room noticed me because I was a student, and there's a particular novelty to a young voice entering the bureaucratic register. Good evening, I said, and heard my voice come back to me through small plastic speakers. My name is, my throat tightened. I forced the syllables into the world. I'm a junior. I'm here with my classmate Claude to talk about a teacher who isn't here. I said Hazel's name like striking a flint. I watched it throw a spark. There was a noise in the room, tiny, someone's intake of air, the sound you make when a ghost sits down. I didn't mention files or basements, but I did mention dates and the Office of Professional Practices and how easy it is to put something in a drawer because the present is so loud. I quoted Hazel's scribble from the back of the photograph. Don't let them pretend they forgot, and felt, for a second, like maybe she was really in the room, her weight bending a chair. Claude stepped in on the policy bits, his voice steady and almost gentle, which is how you say hard things to people you want to still look at you afterward. He didn't accuse. He pointed. I watched the board study him the way they study a fiscal projection, with cautious interest. Harrow spoke after us. He said Hazel's name, too. He said words I know cost him. I was wrong about how I handled it. He didn't cry. He looked like a man who had finally stopped telling a story that protected him. He proposed the Hazel North Scholarship for Scientific Integrity, to be granted each year to a student who demonstrates rigorous skepticism and moral courage in scientific practice. He proposed that the district post the complaint file as part of historical record, with Hazel's family's permission. He asked the board to accept the fire marshal's report as an appendix to that record so that theories didn't bloom like mold in damp places. The board chair did that bureaucratic thing where emotion and procedure try to wear the same hat. We appreciate the students' comments, she said in a tone that could cover any situation. We appreciate the principal's transparency. She suggested a vote. The board members moved their hands in a choreography of yes. The motion carried. A woman in the back dabbed at her eyes, the way Ms. Alvarez had. A man in a polo shook his head at the word scholarship as if money were always a betrayal of something else. My mother, who had slipped in without telling me, squeezed my shoulder at an angle that said, I know enough. I'm proud. I'm terrified of the rest. I didn't turn to look. I didn't want to cry into the microphone. After, people did the thing people do when a hard thing has been said out loud. They pretended it was easy because now it had words. We shook hands with the board and didn't mention that we knew the exact temperature of the basement air at 12:42 a.m. Claude collected the Hazel copies from the table and left one in front of a small name plate engraved Facilities Director, a man who had stared at the ceiling during most of our talk. Harrow caught us on our way out. Thank you, he said, which felt weirder than being scolded. I'll need you to meet with Hazel's sister. She teaches at the community college. She'll want to talk about the scholarship terms. What if she hates us? I asked. For using her name to, I don't know, to make ourselves feel good. She'll decide, he said. You two did something the school should have done, remember? He paused. It took him a breath to add, and yes, I'll schedule to replace the old sprinkler heads sooner than the budget wanted. There are a few other aging bones we can shore up while we're being honest. The next days were a rush of things that managed to be both mundane and permanent. We met Hazel's sister, Marta, in a coffee shop that smelled like espresso and wet umbrellas. She wore glasses that magnified the part of her eyes that looked like Hazel looking past the camera. She brought a manila folder of her own, thick at the edges from being opened and closed. She would have liked you, Marta said after we stumbled through our story with the trespass airbrushed out. She didn't suffer cowards or neat answers. She always said, science is how you tell the truth on purpose. We discussed criteria, a lab project proposal with a component on safety ethics, a reflective essay on a time the student refused a shortcut, a recommendation letter that mentioned a moment of friction, not obedience. I don't want it to be for the valedictorian, Marta said, half smiling. I want it for the kid who argued a point after class respectfully and made the teacher go home and read again. Perfect, Claude said, his pen scratching. He'd built a form by the time we finished drinking what we'd ordered. We toured the lab with a plumber the district hired, a man named Don whose forearms told a story about metal before computers. He tapped along the line that fed the benches and nodded at the small expansions we never noticed, little give where the line met old brick. Heat makes water do mean things, Don said cheerfully. You want slack baked into your plan, or you're going to hear your mistakes creak at 2 in the morning. I wrote that down like it was for chemistry, because it is, and also not. At night, after I studied, I kept pulling out the note I'd written on the night of the break-in, walking to clear my head, and smoothing it flat. It had become a relic, which is a silly thing to call paper with my own handwriting on it, but there we were. I tucked it into the back pocket of the notebook where we kept our drafts for the scholarship rubric and found it reassuring. The way a scar is a story that says you healed. Somewhere in that run of days, Claude and I fell into a new way of being friends that I didn't know how to translate into any of the categories adults like. We were conspirators. We were editors of the truth. We were also two kids who still laughed at dumb puns in lab. This precipitate is precipitate my patience. He grabbed my hand once in the hallway when someone set off a locker bang just as I was opening mine, and neither of us made a joke about it. He asked if I wanted to see a lock he was learning to pick. I asked if he wanted to see the shorthand I'd made for redox reactions. He called me chemist like a nickname. I called him Undertaker once by accident. He joked about it the first night, and he pretended to be offended while smiling. One afternoon, we returned to the basement, with permission this time, to help Don trace lines for the map the facilities office would post online. The archive room looked exactly the same and also less haunted. Claude rested his palm against the cabinet where Hazel slept, respectful. I'm going to write the scholarship description in her voice, I said, which meant in the voice I'd imagined from fragments. What's her voice like? He asked. Exacting, I said. And unexpectedly funny when she's annoyed. Like someone we know, he said. Like two someones, I corrected. He grinned, then sobered, his expression altering the air. Do you regret it? He asked. The break-in. Breaking into the story, he said. I thought about the night, the moths, the keys, the line of light under the door, the feel of my own name leaving my mouth into a microphone. I thought about Ms. Alvarez's fist under her nose. I thought about a scholarship a kid I didn't know would win one day for doing something we'd never hear about. No, I said. I regret we had to. I don't regret that we did. He nodded, and we stood there in a room that smelled like dust and coming clean. The scholarship launched with a small ceremony in late spring. Marta spoke first, a photograph of Hazel on an easel beside her, the same guarded gaze, the jaw that said do not waste my time. Harrow stood off to the side like a man trying not to look like he was trying not to cry. The board chair welcomed donors. The superintendent said the words integrity and lesson. Ms. Alvarez squeezed my shoulder as if to make sure I didn't float away. A freshman in a crisp shirt played Claire de Lune on the school's sad piano, and it sounded like hope anyway. We decided to give the first scholarship in pilot to a senior named Lena who had designed a microfluidic chip for monitoring fertilizer runoff and, when told to change her conclusion because it made a local donor uncomfortable, had refused. Her essay was a scalpel. In the photo for the website, she looked like Hazel if you squinted not in the face but in the posture, the stance of someone braced kindly against a larger thing. At the reception afterward, among cookies and Capri Suns, Don cornered me and launched into a cheerful story about a boiler that once blew its relief valve in his first week on the job and how he learned to stop trusting good enough in systems that held pressure. I nodded, learning the parable in it without him having to name it. Claude flitted like a moth, collecting names for next year's recommendation committee, which is an absurd thing to say about a teenager, but there we were again. On the edge of the crowd, Harrow drew Claude and me aside. He held out an envelope, the old-fashioned kind with a string and button to close it. Inside were the originals from Hazel's folder, the ones we had photographed in the night. My breath caught like I'd run too far, too fast. I scanned everything into the record, he said. Marta has a copy. We accepted the city's request to include their report in the public file. I'm giving you these because they're yours in a way that's difficult to describe and impossible to justify. Keep them safe. Or burn them if that feels truer. Is this legally fine? Claude asked. Probably not, Harrow said. But morally adjacent. We took the envelope like it was hot. Later, in the car, I held it in my lap for the entire ride home the way one holds a small sleeping animal. I didn't want to return the past to the future. I also didn't want to keep it somewhere it would catch dust again. I ended up slipping the contents into clear sleeves and tucking them into the back of the scholarship binder, labeling the section Origin. It felt ridiculous and perfect. Claude wrote in the margin with a pencil, "Don't let them pretend they forgot, not as a threat anymore, but as maintenance." School year ended the way school years do. Yearbooks collected signatures that were 40% well wishes and 60% apologizing for never really knowing each other. Finals came, were survived, left echoes. On the last day, Ms. Alvarez handed me my chemistry exam with a 96 circled and the comment, "You study like you're building a bridge. Keep going." I wanted to say I had stepped onto a different bridge and she had made sure the planks held. Instead I said thank you, the way you do when the words you need are longer than the bell schedule allows. That night, the jacaranda dropped purple on the sidewalk again like stationary. Claude texted at 11:04 p.m. Claude, did you know hazel is also a color? Gold with green. Me, I know now. Claude, it's also a tree that bends without breaking. Me, appropriate. Claude, good night, chemist. Me, good night, undertaker. Claude, that's still for funerals. Me, we buried a cheap answer. We're allowed the vocabulary. Claude, we exhumed a person. Better vocabulary. Me, better. I was studying for exams when Claude texted about a break-in, and I thought we were about to enter a room and take something. It turned out we were entering a story and putting something back. If you told me then that a scholarship would exist because two teenagers couldn't stand a neat lie, I would have asked you to show your sources. I have them now, a filing cabinet in a basement, a photograph with red digits, a principal who learned the difference between covering and owning, a sister with careful hands, a plumber with parables, a teacher with a fist under her nose. Sometimes I think about the version of me who would have stayed at her desk, highlighter bleeding over osmosis, choosing good behavior over good work. I don't fault her. She lives in me still. She helps me stop before I break things that don't need breaking. But given the same text from Claude, I would still put on my shoes while typing no. I would still go out into the night that equals everyone and stand under moths that look like witnesses and let keys chime too loud. A month later, when the school posted the new lab safety protocols and the map of the lines with Don's notes, and when next year's rumor mill started to choose new grist, someone younger than me asked why the scholarship was named for a person they'd never met. I told them the short version and watched the light move through their face the way it had moved through mine the first time Claude said proof. They asked if Hazel had been a hero. I said she was a person who told the truth on purpose and paid for it. Heroes are a genre. People are the story. The jacaranda will do its tap dance on my window again next exam week. I'll probably still hate osmosis for being both simple and not. But now, when a neat answer presents itself looking immaculate and smug, I will think of a damp basement, a thin folder, a woman's name on a tab, and I will lean on the drawer until it opens. I'll remember that neat stories are for fables and news briefs, and the kind that matter come with rust and fingerprints and someone who whispers don't let them pretend they forgot. The title of that night lives exactly as it happened. I was studying for exams when Claude texted, "We're breaking into the school tonight." It wasn't a warning so much as an invitation. If the story is full now, it's because we filled it, with our small reckless, our large careful, our voices in a room that learned how to listen a little better. And if there's a sequel, and there always is, if you keep your shoes near the door, it will probably begin the same way, with a message I pretend to refuse as I stand up, because some doors you don't wait to open. You learn which ones. You memorize the feel of the keys. You go.